Ladies and gentlemen, today is a day when we will discuss the independence of Brazil. I am Eric. Today is January 23rd, and I was really anxious, to talk about this event because it is really an important event in the history of this nation. Okay, so I am gonna do my best to show you as many details as possible involving the whole event of the independence of Brazil. Okay, so here you have a painting, a one of the most famous illustrations of the independence. This is the moment when Dom Pedro I, on the banks of the Ipiranga River, would have shouted the independence shout. Okay? Well, actually, most biographers say that it was not really, that brave act, and it was not beautiful, as you can see here in this painting. But at least one thing is clearly here, and is really and does have everything to do with the reality of the event of the independence. On my left, you have here the people, right? The people. And the people did not participate in this process, okay? This is a fact. The people that really led the independence process in Brazil was just the bourgeoisie, the agrarian owners, and the nobility together with Dom Pedro first. Okay, so this is something that we should, keep in mind as we start seeing everything related to the independence of Brazil. Well, actually, the independence really started with the coming of the Portuguese royal family to Brazil. If you didn't watch the previous class, please go back to that class and watch it because it's truly important. Okay, Dom João VI, when he came to Brazil fleeing from Napoleon Bonaparte, Dom João VI really implemented many measures in Brazil, like the opening of the ports, right? Like the treaty with England and many other things. All those measures taken by Dom João VI fully contributed to the independence ideals, right? To the independence intention that many people in Brazil had in mind at the time, right? Although not the entire nation wanted independence, but many people here really wanted the independence. Okay, so after some time here in Brazil and all those measures taken by Dom João VI, we have in 1815 Napoleon Bonaparte being expelled from Portugal, right? And in 1820, we have the Liberal Revolution of Porto, a very important event. And then after this event that was led by the bourgeoisie in Portugal, right, the court of Portugal, which was an institution established after this liberal revolution, this court of Portugal demanded that the Portuguese King Dom João VI, returned to Portugal, right? And yeah, obviously Dom João VI, he had to yield, to give in to the pressure, and he returned. Eventually he returned to Portugal, but he left in Brazil Dom Pedro I, right? That was placed as regent of Brazil. However, the Portuguese courts were not really entirely happy only with the return of Dom João VI because they more than ever wanted the colonial pact between Portugal and Brazil to be reestablished. They were really interested in that. And they knew that by leaving Dom Pedro first in Brazil was not a good idea, right? They were pretty much aware of that. And, well, what we see after that is this Portuguese courts more and more demanding, all the old things that had been revoked by Don Juan VI with all the measures taken by him. And also, they are going to be, requesting that Dom Pedro I returns to Portugal as well. But Dom Pedro stays in Brazil, right? And in January 1822, a document with 8,000 signatures requested that Dom Pedro I stayed in Brazil as Prince Regent, right? It is really interesting that we understand all the details involving this decision made by Dom Pedro first. And obviously, there's something really important that I forgot to mention here. Dom Juan VI, he went back to Portugal with lots of gold from Brazil. Gold that was in the Bank of Brazil safe, right? And not only that, the courts in Portugal also demanded the return of many institutions here that had been established by Don Juan VI and many things, implemented by him here. So, and still they wanted Dom Pedro first there. They really wanted the colonial pact back, right? And, well, these measures, together with the intransigence of the Portuguese during negotiations with Brazilian representatives and the disrespectful treatment of Brazil, the disrespectful treatment towards Brazil caused the resistance of Brazilians to the Portuguese to increase, and also reinforced the idea of separation in some places in Brazil. As I said, in some places of Brazil, because there were certain regions that were really not interested at all in the independence of the country, okay? So, as I said, before 1822, that I mentioned there, as you can see on the slide, in December 1821, the order arrived demanding the return of Dom Pedro to Portugal, right? And as a consequence, we have the rise of the Resistance Club in Brazil. In January, during a Senate hearing, a document with more than 8,000 signatures was delivered to Pedro. This document required the Prince Regents stay in Brazil. It was like they were begging, Pedro, please, stay. If you stay, think for a while. It's going to be the best thing for you as well. If you go back to Portugal, you will be nothing but a shadow of your father for a long time, and who knows what else may happen. But here in Brazil, if you stay here, you will be the king. You will be the emperor, and you will really make history here. So Pedro was like thinking, and supposedly motivated by this, Dom Pedro said words that entered the history of the country. And I say supposedly because no one really guarantees that this is what Pedro said. But anyway, what he would have said is that as it is for the good of all and general happiness of the nation, I am ready. Tell the people I'm staying. Well, this event marked the stay day, okay? The stay day. So he decided to remain here in Brazil. Well, anyway, but there was still a desire by many in Brazil to remain the bond with Portugal. Don't forget that. So the succession of events in the following months were responsible for inciting in Brazil the rupture with Portugal. Since, as mentioned, this was not certain in January 1822, right? And there are two people that were key for Dom Pedro's decision making. First, his wife, Maria Leopoldina, and second, José Bonifácio, that was really like a shadow of Dom Pedro I during his kingdom, during his reign here in Brazil, right? So, anyway, we have then in May 1822, the day of fulfillment, right? Because the Portuguese courts kept sending letters and requests here to Brazil, right? And then in this day of fulfillment in May 1822, this decree was signed by Dom Pedro saying that the laws and orders decreed in Portugal would only be valid in Brazil with the endorsement of the Prince Regent. Yeah, things are becoming more serious now. And then we have the start by this time of the drafting of a new constitution for the country, right? So we had the call of a constituent meeting to draft the constitution, right? So the relationship of the Portuguese courts with the Brazilian authorities remained irreconcilable, right? And, well, on August 28th, 1822, orders from Lisbon arrived in Brazil with a message that Dom Pedro's return to Portugal should be immediate. Moreover, the end of a series of measures in force in Brazil and considered there was the end of the series of measures in force in Brazil. And Dom Pedro's ministers were accused of treason, right? So Maria Leopoldina, Dom Pedro's wife, received this order from the Portuguese courts demanding that Dom Pedro return to Portugal, right? And among all this context of instability, of uncertainty, on September 2nd, she organized an extraordinary meeting and signed a declaration of independence and sent it to Dom Pedro I, who was traveling to São Paulo. So the messenger named Paulo Bragado, very few people know about this guy, he managed to reach the entourage of Dom Pedro at the time in São Paulo, right? And in this moment, this is when you see this picture here, right? So the messenger reached, Dom Pedro I's entourage, and, well, biographers say that Dom Pedro in that day had intestinal issues. So it would have been really impossible for him to shout. Otherwise, you know what I mean, right? But anyway, the the official version of history is that he ratified the independence order with a shout on the banks of the Ipiranga River. And again, here I'm showing you another painting. And in this painting, differently from the previous one, you see the people close to Dom Pedro, and this is not really what happened. Okay, the independence movement, again, I'm going to emphasize that, was really a movement made, urged, and implemented by the nobility and the bourgeoisie and the emperor, Dom Pedro I. It had nothing to do with the people, right? Well, so you think it ended there? No, it didn't end there. Because many people in Brazil think that independence shout took place and that's it. Brazil was independent. No way. A series of regions in Brazil demonstrated their dissatisfaction and rebelled against the independence process. So Brazil was a huge country, and the unity of the nation was quite delicate, was quite fragile. So, what we are going to see is, these regions, especially Pará, Bahia, Maranhão, and Cisplatina, currently Uruguay. These four regions really rebelled against the independence process. The last one, Cisplatina, was not a case of really dissatisfaction with that, but they took advantage of the fragile political moment of the country and tried to declare their own independence, which would inevitably take place years later. Okay? Well, Dom Pedro I was unable to organize an army that could fulfill all these expedients, these rebellions, these uprisings going on in the country. So what he did, he resorted to financial aid from England again and hired the service of English mercenaries. And you're going to see here these two guys. Let me see their names because I forgot. The first one here, this guy is Cochrane. Let me see his name here, his full name, because I really forgot it. I'm sorry about that. No. Well, let me see if I can find it here somewhere. Okay, I cannot find it. But anyway, I remember his last name. It's Cochrane. And this one here, I really forgot his name. But anyway, these guys were really, two of the main mercenaries that were hired by Dom Pedro I, to overcome the rebellions going on in the country. And obviously, it took a lot of money to hire them. And what happened as a consequence is the indebtedness in Brazil, right? Well, by the way, the consequences of the independence in Brazil were the emergence of Brazil as an independent nation. Yes, it really happened, although it didn't really change the reality, of the poor people in Brazil. The building of the Brazilian nationality. Oh yeah, now we're gonna have the building of a national face, a national way of being, a national culture here. We are going to have the establishment of a monarchy in the Americans, right? The only one on the continent, along with the Haitian and the Mexican ones. Very important to say. And, well, Brazil had to pay an indemnity tax of £2 million to Portugal, so that Portugal could acknowledge Brazil's independence. And also, we had to, pay all, those English mercenaries there that overcame the rebellions in Brazil. So that indebtedness remained a reality in the country for many and many years, right? And that's it. Okay? Well, this is the independence of Brazil. I hope you have enjoyed that. And see you in our next video.